All right, good evening. Welcome everybody to our Wednesday night Bible study. I appreciate you being here with us. We've been out for 2 weeks, a 2-week sabbatical, but guess what? I can see you now. My eyes are fixed and I'm doing great, so thank you for your prayers and my cataracts. But anyway, let's go back now to pick up with Acts chapter 24. And we're going to be picking up with verse 17 this evening. So anyway, go to Acts 24, verse 17, and while we're opening up our Bibles, let's also open up with the word of prayer. Gracious, loving Heavenly Father, again, it is a joy and a pleasure to be back in your house, one with each other, with you. We're connected by being here together, while we're also connected through you with those who are joining us for this live broadcast. And so, dear God, just bless us all. Unite us, dear Lord, as only you and you alone can do. Unite us through the power of your Son, through the power of your Spirit, and now through the power of your Word. So lead us now, guide us and direct us, as once again we give ourselves to you and ask this in your holy, your mighty, and your very precious name. Amen. All right, so a quick recap, because it has been 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we were together, and we were looking at verses 10 to 16, you remember. And this is the first half of Paul's response to the charges against him made by the lawyer Tertullus, okay? And as we opened up there in verse 10, remember we talked about how Luke makes sure to point out 2 things that did not happen. How first, that when Tertullus finishes making his accusations against Paul, he then encourages the governor Felix, you question him now. You can find out that everything I'm saying is true. You ask him yourself, which was a normal Roman court procedure. But here's the thing, Felix does not do that. He does not question Paul. Instead, he just simply motions for Paul to now speak in his own defense. But secondly, one of my favorites is, when Tertullus is doing his talking, he's heaping all kinds of praise and honor upon the governor. When it comes time for Paul to speak, Paul does not do that. Instead, he simply acknowledges him, I know that you're the governor, and then he begins his defense. And we then looked at how Paul responded in 3 ways concerning the charges against him. We talked about how first he points out he'd only been there for 12 days. How can he put together all this stuff he's being charged with in just a matter of 12 days? 12 days is not sufficient enough time. Secondly, in verse 12, Paul points out that they did not find him arguing or disputing with anyone in the temple. Most importantly, they didn't find him stirring up or aggravating the people or causing a riot. He didn't start a crowd or anything like that. All right, that was something that Rome truly hates to happen. I'll get that in a second. And then third, Paul points out to Felix there in verse 13 that he is no threat. He has never been a threat to the peace of Rome. He called the Pax Romana. That was something very important to Rome. But this also would have hit home for Felix, because as the governor, he would have been responsible for the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, there in that province. But then in verse 15, Paul does the most unexpected thing. You remember, he admits to being guilty of something. He finally admits for the first and only time being guilty. Well, I should say the first time by admitting that he is guilty of something. That he's guilty of being a member of the way. Reference to Christians who follow the way of Christ. But it wasn't an admission of guilt. It's an admission of faith. And in his admission of faith as being a part of the way, he talks about how the way is not a sect or a cult. It was still something that was a part of the Jewish faith and religion, that in being a member of the way, he worships the same God that they do. He hasn't created or made up some new God. Third, he also continues to follow the law of Moses along with the teachings of the Old Testament prophets. And then fourth, he talks about how he has the same kind of same kind of hope that his accusers have. A joint hope in God. Then in verse 15, Paul makes reference to how God is going to raise one day both the righteous and the unrighteous. There's always been a question about what he means, but it's believed that Paul is talking about making a reference to the day of judgment, when the righteous and the unrighteous will be judged. And on that day, everything that Paul's been preaching about concerning the gospel of Christ is going to be true. But most importantly, on that day, that's when he's going to be proven right. And he then concluded our time looking at verse 16. How Paul, switches his argument from being political in nature. Here he now moves it to being religious, or let's say theological in nature. And he does it by pointing out how he has that clear conscience within himself. And he does it in three ways. Remember, we talked about the Greek words, talk about how he is an athlete. He trains as an athlete would train, and he works to not stumble, but to be stable in his life. But most importantly, how the Greek word talks about how he is constantly, always working on these things, constantly training his life so he will not be a stumbling block to others. Now what I want to do is pick up at verse 17. This is the second half of Paul's argument in his defense. And I want to read verses 17 to 21 with you. So picking up with verse 17. Now after some years I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices. While I was doing this, they found me in the temple, completing the rite of purification without any crowd or disturbance. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation, if they have anything against me. Or let these men here tell what crime they had found when I stood before the council. Unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them. It is about the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today. And that's where he concludes his argument. Now let's go back and look at this then. Look at the second half of his argument. Picking up now with verses 17 and 18. Now with these two verses, Paul is now continuing his religious or theological argument. And he's doing this argument by pointing out four specific things still concerning these charges against him. Now in verse 17, what's the very first thing that Paul points out to Felix? What's the first thing in verse 17 he points out? That he has been what?
He's been away for several years.
He's been away for some years, several years. Anybody got many years? That he's been away many years.
After many years.
Okay. Well, the thing is, now you remember, we looked at this. Back at the conclusion of his third missionary journey, we talked about how over thousands of miles that he traveled. But most importantly, how his journeys, for those three missionary journeys, those trips, it took him just over 9 years to complete. Which means that this is the entire time that he's been what?
On his journeys.
Huh?
On his journeys?
On his journey, but it also indicates the time that he's been what? Away from Jerusalem. He hasn't been in Jerusalem in 9 years. So what is Paul seeking to tell Felix then when he points out that he's been away at least 9 years during all this? Well, that in being away from Jerusalem, Israel, all these years, what could he have possibly done to these men now? To make them hate him so much that they would bring these false charges against him. Or to put it this way, he's been out of town for 9 years. He suddenly shows up, and within a 12-day period of time, they now want him dead. He's been away. What is it that made them do it? The bottom line is, you just don't ever know what's going to spark somebody up. I always talk about the fact that in the church, in the Methodist church, I have what's known as the Pastor-Parish Relations Committee. That's the committee. If you got something against me, you got a problem, you go to them and they help work it out. I always point out to the members of the pastor parish whenever we first get together, I always remind them that, they're a committee for people who may not like me. The truth is, though, there are people out there that don't like them either. They just don't have a committee people can run to and complain to about it. Seems like everybody's got something against you. Paul's just simply saying, Felix, I've been gone all this time. I don't even know why this started here. But then look at verse 17. Paul continues on in verse 17 by pointing out the two reasons as to why, though, he does come, why he is there. So first off, Paul has come to now do what? In returning to Jerusalem, he has come to first do what?
Bring alms and offering.
All right, okay. First off, to just bring, let's look at the alms. Or some of you may have money. Some of you may have the word gifts, okay? Now here's the thing. What Paul is referring to here, these are the alms, the gifts, the offerings that have been taken up by who? Do you remember? We studied this when we looked at it in Acts. We've talked about it, okay? We also talked about this when we did our study on the book of Romans, and we talked about it when we did the study of 1 Corinthians. This offerings came from who? Do you remember? Came from the Gentile Christians. Remember, word reaches the churches that what has happened? A severe famine has hit the land. Remember, we talked about the guy that prophesied about it. And the churches take up money for Paul to eventually take back to Jerusalem. You can read about it, like I said, in Romans 15, verses 25 to 28. And he also makes a reference to it in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. And if you just want to flip back through Acts again, you can find it there, where mention is made about all of this, okay? So this is where it came from. But the most important thing that we need to look at is, who did Paul bring these alms, this money, or the gift to? Now, the New Living Translation, it states that Paul brought these gifts to aid my people, okay? Aid my people, remember that. The NIV, the New International Version, says to bring my people gifts for the poor. Now, when you tend to read this, and you think about Paul, who is it that he's bringing these gifts to? When he refers to this, a lot of people think that he's talking about his fellow Christians, right? That he's doing it for the church there in Jerusalem. But is that what he's really doing? Now, the King James Version, along with the New Revised Standard, says that Paul was bringing alms to my nation. Okay? Was bringing alms to my nation. However, in the Greek text, that we get a little clearer understanding what Paul is bringing these gifts and who he's bringing them to. It says in the Greek text, bringing alms to the nation of me. So from this, we can now understand that Paul actually brought these offerings for who? He brought it actually for two groups of people. Who? Brought it for the Christians, but he also brought it for
Himself.
Huh?
Did you say me?
For the nation of me.
Oh.
So that means he brought it not just for the Christians, he also brought the money for who else?
The Jews?
For the Jews. He did it very good. He does it for the Jews who are also there in Jerusalem. He brings them for both groups. Okay? Yeah, very good. Pat yourself on the back. That was a good one. Now, what is Paul then saying to Felix and Felix? He's saying to me, how can they accuse me of being a threat to the Jewish people when I came here to help them? When I came here to bring money as a result of the famine that happened here. How can they say I'm a threat? See, the truth is, some people do what? They just see what they want to see.
Stuff.
They just make up stuff. They see what they want to see, okay? But there's another reason why Paul would want to point this out to Felix. One you would never think about. You see, giving to help the poor was something that the Roman government would have both endorsed and encouraged, okay? Now, why do you think the Roman government would have endorsed or encouraged Paul to do this with this money? Okay, why do you think?
So they wouldn't have to be responsible.
All right, they would have very good. That's one good. And we'll discover another reason for that. But see, the bottom line, actions like this of giving money to those in poor, they help keep the people happy and content. And when the people are happy and content, then they are far less likely to do what?
Riot.
Riot. Remember, Rome hates riot.
Right.
Now, they'll do other things. They want to keep the peace. They know one of the best ways to stop riots is to keep the peace and make people happy. People only want to cause trouble when they're what? When they're angry, they're hurt, they're upset. But see, as long as they're happy people don't cause riots. Content people don't go against the government, okay? So that's the main reason why. Once again, he's hitting upon Felix as what? The governor of Rome. He's hitting him where he sits, on his seat there. So that's the first thing about bringing these alms, these gifts. But what's the second thing that Paul points out that he did then in verse 17? Okay, the NIV and the King James Version tells us that Paul came to make or to bring offerings, okay? Now, the New Revised Standard and the Greek text said they came to offer sacrifices. But I like what the New Living Translation puts it. I like it this way. It says in the New Living Translation, and to offer sacrifices to God. Okay? Which I believe is a more accurate understanding of what Paul's seeking to do here. Now, what do you think is Paul's purpose behind this? To say I've offered sacrifices.
To set an example.
He said in that example, very good. But once again, what would be his other purpose behind it? Because once again, he's attempting to show what? How he's always striving to follow the what?
Law.
Huh?
The law.
The law. And the teachings of the Old Testament prophets, okay? And think about it. What can be more Jewish than following the law and making sacrifices to God? You can't do anything more Jewish than that, and that's exactly what Paul is doing. But now, let's move into verse 18. As we move into verse 18, we come into the last of Paul's religious, theological argument at this time. Now, if you remember, look back at verse 6 of this chapter. Take a moment and just glance back at that. And in verse 6, we discover, once again, Tertullus accuses Paul of doing what? In verse 6.
Profane the temple.
All right, profaning, desecrating the temple itself, okay? Which I believe, this is just my theological educated assumption, I should say, I guess. But to me, to be accused of desecrating the temple, that's probably the accusation that hurt Paul the most, I think.
Yes.
To accuse him of doing that. That's why in verse 18, now go back to verse 18 with me. Paul now responds to this accusation in three very specific ways, okay? This is just one accusation, but he has 3 points about it. There in verse 18. First off, he tells Felix that when they came for him, they did find him where?
Purified in the temple.
They did find him in the temple. You see, now that's the second thing Paul has admitted to. Remember the first one, he admits, yeah, I'm a member of the way. The second thing he admits to is, yes, I was in the temple. I was in the temple that day. Paul has never denied that fact. But then here's secondly, that's the first thing. Secondly, but that when they found him in the temple, all that he was doing was what? Now, if you got the New Revised Standard and the New Living Translation together, they basically tell us the same thing, that Paul was completing the rite of purification. He was completing a purification ceremony. Now, the King James Version tells us that they found him purified in the temple. But this time it is the NIV that goes closest to the original Greek text. The NIV points out that Paul was ceremonially clean. But the Greek text, in the Greek, it uses what they call a perfect passive participle found in the Greek language. The word is hegnismion. Hegnisminon. Okay? And it translated means to be ritually clean. Okay? To be ritually clean. Now, what's the difference between being, just a rite of purification or even ceremonial clean. To be ritually clean means that he did what? He followed the exact what? Rituals found in the law. Once again, he's following the law with this. But most importantly, as he's doing this, that thirdly, when they found him, what was not there? There in verse 18. What was not there?
Tumult.
Huh?
Tumult.
Disorder.
There was no, because there was no what?
Disorder.
Disorder. There's no disorder because there was no what?
Riots.
There was no because there was no crowd.
Oh.
You can't have a riot without a crowd. You see, there was no crowd or group of people with him to cause a riot or trouble within the temple himself. He's in there alone. He admits, I was there, but I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was becoming ritualistic clean, and I was doing it by myself. There was no crowd there. Now, what is Paul's then religious or theological argument then that he's now seeking to make by pointing out these things to Felix, okay? Well, first off, that with him being inside the temple, getting himself ritually cleansed, then how in the world could he have also been with a crowd of people causing a public disturbance? So that's the first thing. I'm doing this. How could I have done the other thing? Secondly, that with him being there to give offerings to the Jewish people, while at the same time following the rituals for purification and not causing any trouble while he was doing this, does this sound like someone who's doing what?
Causing trouble.
Causing trouble? Causing trouble by doing what? Causing trouble by disrespecting both the law and the temple. Remember, that's what they were accusing him of. Of breaking the law. Doing that against the temple. What's the word? I can't remember now what they, desecrating the temple. I can think for a moment there. Does this sound like someone who's disrespecting both the law and the temple? You see, the law and the temple, they are two of the most revered and respected parts of their Jewish, of their Jewish faith. Okay? But it's the third thing that Paul points out that I really love in all this. Because what Paul ends up saying to Felix is this, that with it being the Jews who found him in the temple, because remember that's what he points out, the Jews found him in the temple, and he's following their religious teachings and beliefs, that when they arrested him, they did not arrest him because he was doing what? Breaking what? Any kind of, remember he's for Felix, so Felix judges him under what?
Roman law.
Roman law. He's not there breaking any kind of Roman law. What they did was then to arrest him for doing what? Basically, they arrested him for worshiping God and upholding the faith of Israel. See, all these things they've been, and Paul simply points out, how can I be guilty of all these things when I was simply following the law, and I was doing this, and basically I'm worshiping God, and they arrest me. You see, so it doesn't matter what you do. There are some people in this world, it doesn't matter what you do. You're wrong no matter what. And all we can do is respond how? Don't respond with the same hatred. We're called to respond with love. With grace and mercy and forgiveness. Is it easy? No. But there's just people in this world. But the thing is, you cannot overcome evil with evil. The Bible teaches that. You can only overcome evil with goodness. There's just some people out there just going to hate you no matter what. But don't let them drop you down to their level. Now look at verses 19 and 20. Now it's in these verses that Paul now moves his argument from being religious or theological in nature It is in this verse, these two verses here, that Paul now moves his argument into concerning Roman law. Now look at verse 19. Roman law, which was what? We talked about this. Remember I told you this was going to be on the test 2 weeks ago. I told you. Do you remember that it is Roman law for what to happen? If you've been accused of a crime, Roman law states that what must happen? Look at verse 19. What's he saying there?
Oh.
If you've been accused, then you have every right to now have your accusers do what? Stand before you. Roman law states if you've been accused, then your accusers must appear before you in the court, okay? Now look at verse 19. Now up to this point, Paul has never specifically named any of his accusers, okay? But now he points out that his accusers are who? Who are his accusers in verse 19?
Jews from Asia.
Jews from Asia, thank you, sir, from the province of Asia. Okay? Now, it's at this point I got to stop because I know Jack probably sitting over here wondering, where have I gone? Because in the King James Version, Paul names his attackers back in verse 18, didn't he? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to let you know you have just editorial stuff.
I'm the same Jews from Asia.
Yeah, but the bottom line is, they in King James they're listed in 18, and ours is verse 19. But I wanted you to know, Jack, no, you're not losing your mind.
He knows that.
All right. But now, like a true legal expert, Paul, for the first time, is insisting actual Roman legal procedure be followed. This is the first time he's done this, okay? He's cut through all the red tape. He's been doing everything. But for the first time, he now insists Roman legal procedure must be followed. That his accusers be brought to now stand before him as Roman law requires. But here's the thing. Where are they? They're not there. They're gone back to Asia at this point. They started it, then they left. But you got to remember, also 12 days have passed. The festivals are over. Everything's taken care of. Of course, they're going to go home now. Because they did what they set out to do, get Paul arrested. That's all they wanted. They didn't want Paul stopped. So they're not even in town anymore. So what's the other option in verse 20 that Paul now gives to Felix? They're gone. The Jews from Asia, or the province of Asia, they're long gone. So in verse 20, Paul then tells Felix to now do what? That since he can't produce the ones who accused him, for him to now go ahead and allow what to happen? To let the religious leaders do what?
Tell the misdeeds.
Sir?
Tell the misdeeds that Paul did.
Yeah. Well, let them now accuse me of the crime. My accusers, you can't find them. So I tell you what, Felix, go ahead and allow them to do it. Go ahead and ask these religious leaders to state the crime that he is supposedly to be guilty of. Now, this is a demand that Paul can make, okay? He can make this with assurance because these religious leaders were not able to charge him when what happened? Remember back in chapter 28 when Lysias took Paul before the what? Do you remember? Back in chapter 28, he takes him before the Sanhedrin. Lysias is trying to do what? Find out what the charge is. He's got to write a letter to the governor and pass him on. He hasn't got a clue. So remember, he set up that meeting with the Sanhedrin, okay? And on that day, at that meeting, what was the end result? They could not what?
Find him guilty.
They couldn't find him. They couldn't charge him with anything. See, so he can make this demand because they couldn't do it. They could not charge him with anything. All they could do was start a riot. Remember, because he calls out about the resurrection of the dead, the Pharisees join in, the Sadducees go at him, and a riot occurred. And remember, Lysias has to save Paul, call in the Roman soldier, and break up the riot. Okay? But now for me, there's something very interesting about the Greek word for crime that Paul uses, or that Luke records for Paul in his intent. That's the way it is. Paul's probably speaking, he could probably be speaking Latin at this point. He might be speaking Aramaic. Or most likely he is speaking Greek now that I think about it, because Greek was the universal language. So he might have been speaking Greek. Either way, there's a specific word for crime that Luke records here. And that word is adikama, which is a Greek legal term that can be used in two different ways. First off, it is used to indicate the innocence. The innocence of someone who has been accused of a crime, okay? So he said, let them accuse me, even though I am innocent of this crime. But there's a second way it can be used. It can also be used to refer to being innocent of a crime concerning religious impurity. You know, you're accused of being religiously impure. You touched the dead body. They accuse you. Oh, you can't come to the temple. You touched the dead body. You're impure. But that word can also mean that you're actually innocent of the crime of being accused of religious impurity. Or in other words, so what Paul is saying, that I'm innocent of any crime that would have caused me to be religiously impure in any way that they want to come at me. So he's confident that he's going to win this thing at this point, okay? But now he brings it out here. Let's look at verse 21. Paul then concludes his argument in defense of the crimes against him by now returning back once again to his religious theological argument, okay? And he makes a statement concerning the only crime that they can charge him with, along with it being the only crime that he confesses to having committed, which was what? It's the confession that he made that day before the Sanhedrin in chapter 23. He makes the confession concerning the what?
The resurrection.
Of
Jesus.
No.
The dead.
Of the dead. The resurrection of the dead. And as we see, Paul points out at the end of verse 21 that this is the only reason as to why, or as to reason to what. It is the only reason why he's on trial at that time. The only thing that he is truly guilty of is proclaiming the resurrection of the dead, okay? Now, what is Paul's agenda with this? See, most importantly, Paul is pointing out then that this is the only reason why they have placed him on trial. If this is it, then it is completely obvious that he must be innocent of any crime that he's been accused of. Because of what reason? You see, to be accused of proclaiming the resurrection of the dead means what? That he has not done what?
Hasn't committed a crime.
Sir?
Hasn't committed a crime.
He hadn't committed a crime. Because to proclaim the resurrection of the dead is not against what?
The law.
Huh?
Roman law.
What?
Roman law.
Roman law. Is that what you said, Sandy?
No, I just said the law.
Roman law, okay? You see what he's saying is that this is all about upholding Jewish law. And it's got nothing to do with upholding Roman law. Which, with this, he is completely innocent of breaking any kind of Roman law. He admits to this. But it's not Roman law. But here's also something, Paul understands this. You see, Rome also believed this. They believed that one of their responsibilities was to also uphold the laws, or let's say the religious laws of all their citizens. You could be a natural-born citizen. You could be someone who bought your Roman citizenship. Or you could just be a citizen because Rome seized your country. They came in, defeated your army, seized your company, your country, companies, and so they could increase the size, expand their empire. Rome was doing that, okay? But here's the thing. They never stopped people really from worshiping their way. As long as they also included the Roman gods, you could still worship your God. The thing is, they would never intervene or interfere with the religion of their subjects, as long as they did not use their religion to do what?
Create a riot.
Create a riot. Cause a problem for Rome. You can do what you want to, just don't try to hurt Rome. Rome's sacred. You know, it's it. You do not mess with Rome, okay? But the truth is, these Jewish religious leaders also cannot accuse him of committing a crime. You know, they can't accuse him of committing a crime by proclaiming the resurrection of the dead because of what reason? Well, see, the belief in the resurrection of the dead is also a part of what?
Religion.
Of whose religion?
His religion.
The Jew. It's part of their Jewish beliefs and teachings. The resurrection of the dead is part of their teaching. It's a belief and a teaching that is upheld by who? Their own Jewish who? Remember the fight? The Pharisees. Remember, the Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead, which includes who?
Paul.
Paul, thank you. Paul's a Pharisee, remember? Never forget, he was a Pharisee. So, the thing is, they can't accuse him of breaking crime because it's part of their beliefs. You may not agree with it. You may be a Sadducees who say, well, I only believe in the first 5 books of the Bible. The Pharisees say they believe in all the books of the Old Testament, but it's still a part of their Jewish religion, you might say. So what Paul has done then, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is to tear apart all the accusations made against him by Tertullus. One by one, he has proven that he is innocent and should be set free. But as we're going to discover next, God has other plans for Paul. Okay? Unfortunately, he's not going to be set free. So he has proven that he's done what he set out to do. Paul's a very smart man. But in conclusion of it all, I kept thinking over and over about, as I was thinking about Paul and how he is defending himself in this court procedure. I kept thinking about, there's an old, yet still very meaningful question that's been around for a very long time. And I kept going back to that question. That question is simply this. If you or I, if you were to be placed on trial for being a Christian, being accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to find you guilty? Would there be enough evidence in your life to find you guilty? It was with Paul. But he still did what? He still upheld his faith. He defended his faith. If we're put on trial, can we defend our faith? But most importantly, is there enough evidence to find you guilty? That's something, well, if you really think about it, that's a very matter of fact question, isn't it? So let's stop here right now, like I said, because we're going to pick up then with verse 22 next week. And we're going to look now what follows, Paul, after he has made his defense, proven himself right, but still is not going to be allowed to go free. All right? So you at home, thank you for being with us tonight. Come back next week, as we continue this, because one big event's about to happen. It's going to change everything for Paul. All right? So come back and join us next week. Until then, take care. God bless, and goodbye.